in Canada, this endeavor to restrict flavors, it's relatively new. 85% of the products used by 1.1 million Canadians. Something is going to fill that void, and it's not going to be legal. So by definition, it is going to go into the black market.
Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. When public health policymakers implement flavor bans or other restrictions to reduce the appeal of nicotine vaping products to youth, inevitably these interventions have an equivalent impact on adult consumers. Banning or restricting flavors drastically reduces the appeal of vaping for adults too. And for the over 1 million adult Canadians who rely on safer nicotine products, a ban on flavors could mean a return to smoking. Even Health Canada admits to this possible consequence of its proposed national flavor ban. Joining us today to discuss the intended and unintended consequences of the proposed flavor ban is Daniel David, president of VITA, the Vaping Industry Trade Association of Canada. Dan, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me, Brent.
In the regulatory impact statement and analysis that Health Canada produced for the proposed flavor ban, what are the known consequences?
So there is a number of consequences that were considered in their regulatory impact analysis. There were, unknown. One of the major ones was an unknown proportion of dual users, and dual users would be defined as people who are currently vaping but also smoking at the same time. Typically, that's a person who is transitioning over to vaping. That some of them are going to be expected to return to smoking, and obviously that increases their exposure to toxic chemicals and various hazards. Now that's an unknown number. Another impact that they did recognize there was that it would likely discourage some adult smokers from switching over to vaping. Now, there's another two big ones here, one of them being the economic impact to the industry. So the economic impact to the industry was really determined by looking at what happened, and they did look at what happened in Nova Scotia. However, they really looked at a specific area, and what they did was they looked at the closed pod sales in Nova Scotia and the loss of sales. So these are reported weekly. And that decline was at 14.3%. And that was a number that they had, but they applied that right across the board. Now, what wasn't included was any impact really on vape shops. And I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of that later.
Yeah, let me ask you for a second, Daniel, for some of our viewers that are unaware of what happened in Nova Scotia, set the stage. What happened in Nova Scotia?
Well, within the first 60 days of the flavor ban going into effect, and we do have to remember that there was also a nicotine aspect, a nicotine restriction, which the federal government has also implemented, and there was also some new taxation. But right off the bat, within the first 60 days, we lost almost 50% of the industry, like right off the bat. Stores were shutting down all over, 50% of an industry, and it was just slightly under that. I think it was 48 or 44%. But it's a significant amount because they're small businesses that are run by entrepreneurs. They have employees. That's not an insignificant number, and they shut down right off the bat, and the others now are still struggling. Especially with all the other measures that are in place. So what we did, we really wanted to try and understand that impact. So that's why we tracked it. We talked to individual vape shop owners, and this was based on what they were telling us and what happened. And it's tragic, really.
So when you have an action like this, when a regulator intervenes in a marketplace, it's usually to solve a problem. And that problem, obviously, is the issue around youth use. Is that a valid problem?
Well, so, anytime you see youth using an adult-only product, it's an important issue to address, of course. And so yeah, it's absolutely valid. But it's also a concern that the industry shares. That said, I mean, adult-only products are not a new concept. We have laws that are implemented and need to be adequately enforced, and this is one of the reasons why we have, secret shoppers and investigators that go in, and that's typically done by provincial governments, coordinating with federal as well.
Now, Dan, it's been a while since we last had you on the show, so take a moment to fill our viewers in on VITA. What is it, and who's behind the effort?
Yeah, sure. So VITA we're an industry trade association. We represent companies of all sizes operating, across Canada within the Canadian market. Our members include vape shop chains, distributors, manufacturers, closed pod system suppliers, basically the whole range of the vaping industry is who we represent, from the very smallest to the very largest. And so really, our mission is that representation and supporting the Canadian vaping industry in advocating for harm reduction, for youth prevention, and for evidence-based regulations. Not to mention, we also advocate for best-in-class, quality and safety standards. We also do a lot of work in the area of compliance and research. For us, I mean, understanding a problem or an issue is the first step in really trying to address it. You can't address an issue unless you really understand it, and that's creating solutions and that type of thing. That's the core of what we're trying to do, and that applies to compliance, and it also applies to youth uptake.
Well, that begs the question then: do you think Health Canada fully understands this issue?
Well, I think that Health Canada has made certainly an effort to understand. Unfortunately, I think one of the problems is that they've missed a number of areas just to examine and to look at, and there's a whole scope where it's great if you look at the impact on labeling standards. You look at the impact on the industry for inventory issues, various other things along that line. But if you don't consider the impacts right across on the full scope, you're going to have an issue. And unfortunately, in the review for these regulations, they didn't consider the impact on vape shops. What they essentially did is they took the number of sales, or the sales numbers in Nova Scotia from closed pod system sales. So these are done in convenience stores, that type of distribution point, and they determined what the drop was. They used that number, and that number was 14.6%. It was a reduction in closed pod sales in Nova Scotia after a flavor ban was implemented there. Now they took that and they applied it right across the board without considering that, okay, we had nearly 50% of the shops closed. That wasn't part of the equation. So yeah, they did put in a lot of work to try and understand the issue, but they missed some pretty significant areas.
So it's so often the case, Dan. I mean, it's crazy, but when governments enact policy which is intended to reduce a specific risk, it tends to explode other risks in ways unintended and incomprehensible. Do you think that's a fair observation, and how do you think it applies to the proposed flavor ban?
I mean, I do think it is a fair observation. I mean, it's one of the reasons that we have features that are built into the regulatory development process that are specifically designed to address that issue. And for example, when they released the Canada Gazette for this proposal, we had a regulatory impact analysis statement, and we had a cost benefit analysis that was done. These are initiatives that are done prior to proposing any regulatory changes, and their purpose really is to understand and then to balance the risks that are posed by possible unintended consequences and with the benefit of the proposed measure. So, the proposed flavor restriction is a regulatory measure. So those things were done. The unintended consequences were examined, and they were included in the proposed regulations. The challenge, one of the challenges is understanding and accounting for the full scope of these unintended consequences and factoring them in to the determination of benefit versus harm. So, one of those things is the black market, right? I mean, and this is, we'll talk about this, as we go through, but, there were a number of areas that weren't adequately considered. And those have a very major impact on that equation of benefit versus harm. And if you don't, account for the full scope of what it is, your equation's going to be off.
Now, the black market, obviously, I mean, that is the topic of today's episode and certainly been the focus of VITA and a bunch of the work that you've been doing over the last several months. I mean, has flavor bans already birthed the black market in Nova Scotia? And is that just a small example of what we could see across Canada if the national flavor ban is enacted?
So, yeah, well, I mean, we all also have to understand too that because it was a provincial regulation, yes, it has had an impact, absolutely, and this is some of the research that we've done and understood. However, there is a difference between applying this type of regulation at a provincial level and applying it nationally. When you apply it nationally, it covers every company right across the board. And some of what we've seen is, for the folks in Nova Scotia who, are affected by this ban. Obviously, we have the consequences to business and all that kind of stuff. But when it relates to consumers, they still have options. They can still order products from other provinces that are flavored, and they can still be sent in. But at the end of the day, like the impact of the Nova Scotia restrictions, those are small in comparison to what it would be if it was national. If it was national, now we're really encouraging an illicit market, and we've already seen illicit market impacts in Nova Scotia. And
that's exactly what you saw. This is your submission to Health Canada, VITA submission that went in September, obviously connected to this research that we're talking about. It's the illicit market report, impacts of upcoming vaping restrictions. Walk us through, what you guys have done here and how important is this research?
Well, I think it's incredibly important. Before we consider, especially such an impactful measure, an impactful regulation like this, we need to understand what's going on. How does this impact the market? How does it impact consumer behavior? How does it impact business and various other things? So what we did is this past August, we had hired a professional security firm that specializes in investigating illicit market activity. That's what they do. They track, illicit tobacco sales. They're involved with that. They understand how this mechanism works. And, we don't, that's why we hire professional firms like this. So they did a investigation, and they did a number of inspections. Primarily, the focus was in Nova Scotia. And there were some additional inspections that were done on reserves in Ontario and Quebec again. just to understand, what's going on here and what are the impacts of a measure like this. Even the proposal, even just proposing to ban flavors has an impact. But what we saw, Nova Scotia, they have a flavor ban. It's very similar to what the federal government is proposing. Federal government is actually proposing something a little bit stronger. They have a sensory panel that's attached to it, and that has its own issues. They've got an ingredient list of approved compounds that you would be able to use that's restricted to, I think, is 40 or 42 for tobacco, and then tobacco flavors, and then 41 or 42 for mint and menthol flavors. But essentially, proposing that we've got 80 some odd flavor compounds, just compounds, not flavorings in general, but the flavoring molecules. Now, with Nova Scotia, their restrictions are actually a bit more broad. So it was important to understand that impact. And the first thing that we did for us, even before we started to look into the illicit market, was to understand what the impact was on the industry. And the impact on the industry was very obvious. It was very significant, and it happened in a very short period of time. So we had nearly 50% of shops close within the first 60 days. Now that might not be a huge number of shops, in a province like Nova Scotia, but when you look at this across the country, it does get pretty significant, and it does have impacts on employment. But what we did then, after understanding what the impact on the industry was, is we hired this firm, and then they sent in secret shoppers to investigate and to understand, okay, well, of those remaining, what's happening here? Are these fully compliant businesses? Are they operating the way the government expects them to? And is this all good, clean products? Well, not so much. And the important point here, though, is understanding the impact of the measures that are applied.
Now, a big one, Daniel, obviously there's lots here. I've got up on the screen this 25% increase in provincial cigarette sales after the Nova Scotia flavor ban. That's incredible.
So basically, and I've got some numbers here for you. So Nova Scotia did their budget very recently. And one of the things that they found was that the tobacco tax revenue, the performance was pretty significant. They had to perform 106%, which is the best for Nova Scotia since they began tracking. The government actually credits this to a tax increase, but also, and importantly, a 5.6% increase in tobacco consumption. That's important to remember. Now, the vaping tax revenue, so vaping is regulated at the same time, and what they had estimated was a certain number. What they got was a 22.6% lower than the estimate, and that was primarily because the revenue for, the consumption of vaping products was far lower than was projected. So, again, what we have here is, all right, we've got tobacco tax revenue that's 5% higher due to increased consumption. We've got vaping tax that's 22.6% lower because consumption was lower than projected. And this is within the same year that they implemented these measures. So, I think that gives us, it's the only, major Canadian example that we can use. And all these are new types of measures. So, a Canadian example is very valuable. But it gives us a really good understanding of what some of these impacts have. And when you make vaping products less appealing, which means you take away the flavors that people rely on. Yeah, of course. I mean, you're going to have a percentage of them that, all right, well, I don't like this anymore. I might as well just go back to smoking. And especially with some of the perceptions that are out there about vaping and harm reduction, it's easy to understand that the motivation behind consumer behavior on that type of issue. So right. It's very concerning, and it should be considered. And unfortunately, within this, I think the budget came out after the Canada Gazette, so they didn't have these numbers at that point. But we can learn a lot from what happened in Nova Scotia, and we should be.
So we've got VITA here has produced a great video, which we're going to run in its entirety. It's about 6 minutes, and it's totally worth spending the time to do that. And this really covers, the fear, well, not the fear, I guess it is a fear, but it really covers this issue around the black market. This isn't a small thing that could potentially happen in Canada. It's a likely thing. Let's take a listen here at the video.
Vaping has assisted hundreds of thousands of adult Canadians in their fight to stop smoking, many of whom have quit entirely. Why is the Canadian government trying to restrict such a successful harm reduction tool when it acknowledges that vaping is considerably less dangerous than smoking? In July 2021, Health Canada proposed a federal ban on flavored vaping products, worrying that flavors have incentivized an uptick in youth vaping. However, according to Statistics Canada, vaping rates among youth are already on the decline, dropping 7% from 2019-2020. In 2019, illegal and unregulated THC vape pens caused global alarm in the media because of deaths related to THC vaping. Legal and regulated vaping products are currently experiencing the effect generated by this inaccurate negative media. The Public Health Agency of Canada recorded only 20 cases of vaping-related lung disease and 0 deaths as of August 2020. Smoking, on the other hand, is estimated to kill 48,000 Canadians each year. Nova Scotia had an unexpected 5.6% increase in cigarette usage after enacting a provincial flavor ban similar to the proposed federal regulations, while vaping tax income decreased 22.6% in 2020-2021.
The flavor ban is going to drive people back to smoking. It's going to drive my dad back to smoking. It's going to drive me to the black market, and it's going to kill people. And the government said so in their regulations.
I would find a way of getting flavors. I wouldn't care what the government says. I would find a way of getting flavors.
Nova Scotia is already seeing the consequences of the flavor ban. An August 2021 mystery shopping assessment found a growing trend of stores selling and producing unregulated product, circumventing provincial restrictions. 1 in 3 Nova Scotian stores visited by mystery shoppers sold flavored vaping products under the counter.
We have like a separate website. It's run by a couple of guys in New Brunswick.
The contraband market is happy to provide whatever the legal market is unwilling or is unable to provide. And so all we're going to see here is a diffusion effect. We're going to take a product that was legal and that was being taxed, and you're going to move it into the illicit realm where people will be able to procure it more cheaply.
Just to be prepared, we do carry flavored juice. We're going to continue, and we do offer shipping.
Mystery shoppers also visited retail locations in both Ontario and Quebec, where they found a substantial supply of unregulated product as retailers prepared for the proposed ban. If the flavor ban goes into effect, black market entrepreneurs will fill the gap in the market left by an absence of legal flavored products with dangerous, unregulated ones.
By definition, if it's a black market product, there is no quality control because anybody can produce in whatever fashion they want and they can use whatever product they would like. They can cut it in any way that they would like. And so we know that one of the reasons we actually want to have regulated legal markets is because we can provide safe products rather than the unregulated, extremely dangerous kinds that are being produced by organized crime.
A strong, unenforceable black market full of unregulated products presents more danger to Canadian youth than a regulated market that allows the sale of flavors for adults looking for a smoking alternative.
Well, the proposed regulation will now allow organized crime to fill the void of flavored vaping. I don't expect organized crime to act any differently than they do act with cocaine or other drugs when they produce them. These ill-gotten gains will allow organized crime to reinvest profits into other more serious crimes, such as drug trafficking, weapon trafficking, human smuggling, money laundering, and terrorist financing. So rather than having an unregulated market, why not continue to have a regulated market selling vaping products regulated by government, which will be extremely safe, much safer for Canadians than having an alternative market that is controlled by organized crime.
The ease at which anyone, including youth, can access unregulated vaping products online is alarming. With a simple Google search, consumers can find hundreds of websites that will ship straight to your door.
We have another example here of, I guess, measures that are well intended, especially by those who think that it is their prerogative in life to impose virtue on the societies that they govern and in which they live, but in a way that is divorced from the way human behavior actually works. And public policy works best when we take into account how human beings operate and then try to align it with human behavior rather than trying to impose particular virtues on human beings, because ultimately it's very hard to change human behavior.
So I think those last couple of points that were made in terms of, governments should not be imposing virtue, and it's very hard to change human behavior. Those seem to be lessons that regulators have a really hard time learning.
Yeah. I mean, we've understood that from a regulatory standpoint, we should be meeting people where they are, as opposed to where what anybody thinks they should be. I mean, the reality is where you're at, you need to understand that, and there's a challenge there. But I mean, that it's not a simple issue, but the illicit market is a concern. I think that is very underrepresented in the current proposal, and the things that we found are very concerning. They should really concern everybody. I mean, there's a lot of issues here.
Now, I mean, the video talks about organized crime. The video stated drug trafficking, human smuggling, and weapons trafficking could be a result. Now, are these actually real eventualities, or is it just, hyperbole or hysteria?
No, well, I mean, a lot of people often associate organized crime to drugs and weapons, and the thing is, they don't often realize that a significant proportion of that business activity actually includes sales of what are otherwise legal products sold in an illicit way. So whether it's non-compliant products that are sold that aren't taxed, that aren't quality controlled or regulated, they're a lot cheaper. So that actually it is a reality, and one of the things is here in Canada, this endeavor to restrict flavors, it's relatively new, right? I mean, I think it was April of 2020 when the flavor restriction came into effect in Nova Scotia. That's a very local type of a situation. But understanding the broader picture, quite frankly, if you look at this, this is a gift to the black market. If we ban flavors, and think about it this way, we've got at least 1.1 million vapors are people using vape products in Canada. 1.1 million, at least. Now, 85, and numerous surveys have shown this, at least 85% of those use non-tobacco, mint, or menthol products. So then what happens when you take away 85% of the products used by 1.1 million Canadians? Something is going to fill that void. And it's not going to be legal. So by definition, it is going to go into the black market. And now we're pushing consumers either back towards smoking, which is a very known harm. We understand that the quantity of harm that causes, or we're sending them off to black market and illicit sources that we have no controls over. We've got no regulations and quality standards. There's no tax revenue that comes from that to support enforcement activities. There's nothing. It doesn't. When it's such a significant part of the industry, supply and demand. If you take away supply, just like was said on the video, you take away supply from the legitimate legal industry that wants to be compliant, that understands these issues and does takes initiative and puts resources even into some of these programs that we do. You take that away. What do you think that the criminals that are supplying these products are going to have any quality control standards? Try and restrict it to adults only? No, it doesn't work that way. So we also know. So that we have a lot of new research that's been coming out about this issue lately. We have some examples. Nova Scotia is a great one. There's another one from San Francisco. But just recently, the Addictive Behaviors Journal study found some pretty interesting, and they did a survey, and their survey included people from the United Kingdom, Canada, the United States. And what they found was they surveyed vape product users and basically asked them, all right, if you only had the option of tobacco flavored products, what would your behavior be? What would you do? And what they found was that 17.1% of those would likely return to smoking. And this is an aspect that wasn't really considered in the proposal from Health Canada, that it's not just going to be dual users that are switching back. We're going to be looking at people who have completely switched to vaping, that now cannot find something that doesn't taste like garbage to them, or doesn't taste like something that entices them back to smoking. We're going to have on both ends, a return to smoking, which is going to cause harm. But more than that, they also found that same study also found that 28.3% of people would find a way to get banned flavors. And that really echoes one of the statements that was made in that video, that you're going to find a way to get them. Now, finding a way to get those flavors, that can come in a couple different forms, right? So you can have somebody who's ordering, online and getting products from overseas. You can have, of course, like we discussed, you can have people that are buying products from an illicit market source. You can also have people that are DIY, so do-it-yourself products, which is also another particular concern we haven't touched on yet, where the ingredients to make e-liquid to vape, they're readily available. You can buy most of these things, the vast majority of them, from a local retailer. It's propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, both of which you can get from any Shoppers Drug Mart or pharmacy, and food grade flavoring. Some nicotine concentrates. I mean, those are readily accessible online as well. But the food flavoring. Now, a lot of people don't, who do DIY, may not understand that, there's a difference in food flavorings that are appropriate for vaping and those that aren't. And those that are appropriate for flavoring are what we call water soluble. That's what e-liquid is made out of. It's a water soluble compound. They're not oils. Now, what we would have is there's a lot of food flavorings that are oil-based. Now, that's great. That's fine for ingestion. But when you start to inhale that starts to become a problem. And I really don't want to connect our nicotine vaping to this whole EVALI thing. But what they did say was it was an oil-based vitamin E acetate issue.
Right.
Well,
and I think the fact is there, Dan, is that since we started covering this issue in 2015, Health Canada voiced explicitly, is to get the product manufacturing to be in a safe environment, right? To get the making of e-juice out of the bathtub, out of the garage. And what this is doing is this is going to return the whole industry back to being incentivized to do something like that, because literally you can't make a buck, you can't keep your business going if all you're doing is making tobacco flavor and mint or menthol flavor that are not allowed to be sweetened and are supposed to taste like crap.
Right. I mean, that was actually pretty much the objective. It's how do we make vaping products as unappealing as we possibly can? Well, right. What we do is we take out all of the sweetener, anything that may make it taste good. We restrict it to tobacco, mint, and menthol. But more than that, what we do then is we create an approved ingredient list. And one of our technical committees that actually reviewed that found that 10 of those ingredients, those 82 ingredients that were proposed, were actually on the carcinogenic, mutagenic, reprotoxic list. So that wasn't a great list in and of itself. But even more so, I mean, when you look at this, the measures that they're applying are going to push people into these other channels. Yes, of course, you've got these other things, but when you make a product as unappealing as possible, especially when it's a harm reduction product, we're not talking about a product that's tobacco or alcohol where there's no harm reduction value. We're talking about something that is far less harmful, that's recognized by Health Canada as being so, and we're putting these measures in place. I mean, that makes it incredibly unappealing, and that's the goal of it. And then even beyond that, then you have a situation where they've also proposed a sensory attribute panel. So now you have manufacturers that are like, okay, I can only use these 82 ingredients. Now I find a way to make something that's slightly appealing to vapors. But now I have a sensory attribute panel that's going to review my product in a couple of years from now. And they can say, this actually tastes too good, so it's non-compliant. Well, that's a subjective thing. Taste and sense are very subjective. How, and how do you apply that? Who's on that panel? I mean, it gets so complex that you're really, what you're doing is you're giving a gift to the black market. They want that. They want this to happen. The black market views this as it's a low risk product. It's just, it's even lower risk for them than tobacco. Tobacco, illicit tobacco, and they believe they absolutely traffic in illicit tobacco products as well.
Sure.
They're going to look at this and be like, yeah, this is awesome. We love it. They're waiting for it. And we're going to start seeing organized crime, absolutely. And I didn't really, until we got into this, even I didn't really understand the scope of what it could be, and how these organized crime groups operate, and the products that they sell and that they use. And it's not, it's not a nothing thing. This is a very real, serious concern that we should all be concerned about. We all, want to have a regulated, quality controlled, legitimate industry. But this approach is it's got so many unintended consequences that were not considered, that were not seriously thought through and included in their analysis.